Hi, everyone. My name is Tessa Lopez, and I am the Chief of Staff Program Manager at the Texas Department of Information Resources. Thank you for joining us for today's AI Roundtable. Artificial intelligence is changing how government works, and Texas is taking a thoughtful approach to adopting it responsibly. Today, we're bringing together leaders from across DIR to discuss where Texas is in its journey, how we're helping agencies prepare, and what responsible AI adoption looks like in practice. I'm excited to be joined by Meredith Noel, Director of Applied AI, Neil Cooke, Chief Data Officer, Jennie Hoelscher, General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer, and Dave Tucker, Director of Strategic Digital Services. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Tessa.
To kick things off, I'd like to start with a question for everyone. Texas has built a strong foundation for responsible AI through legislation, governance, and statewide collaboration. Where do you think the state is today in its AI journey, and what should the next chapter look like? Dave, we can start with you.
Sure. Well, I think the state's in pretty good shape, based partially on just the common sense legislation that was passed in the last session. It provided a framework and some guidelines for state agencies to implement AI programs at their pace. When they're ready to do it, they can do it, and that reflects our federated model here in the state of Texas as well. In addition, I've really seen changes from planning and setting up governance to actual implementations and lessons learned. So if state agencies can continue to communicate with each other and share ideas, the successes, what went right, what went wrong, I think we're going to see continued accelerated implementation of AI programs across the state.
I agree, Dave. I think we have a great foundation. The legislation that was passed last session to me showed some enthusiasm for AI, cautious enthusiasm, responsible enthusiasm around AI. And I think the next step really is for agencies to take those frameworks and guardrails that we have created, that the legislature has guided us to create, and to start experimenting and innovating and doing that within the guardrails that have been provided to us so that we can learn how to do this responsibly, how to innovate, and how to make AI serve us and improve the way we serve Texans.
I agree with both of you. I think there's been some great foundational things put in place. There's really been an opportunity for folks to explore AI, to understand what it is and some of the risks and limitations and how it can be used. I think the next step for a lot of entities is going to be moving more to focused AI implementation, looking for AI tools that really solve their business problems, and even comparing tools to see which ones provide the best business outcomes and cost savings. So I think it's moving from exploration to more focused implementation.
Yeah, totally agree. Definitely moving from foundational to more of an execution mode. Responsible scaling with some of these use cases is going to be very important. And of course, data readiness, having good data behind these use cases is going to be absolutely critical.
Meredith, I'd like to build on what you just said a moment ago, because you work closely with agencies as they explore and adopt AI. What AI opportunities excite you most across state government? And where do you see the greatest potential for impact?
I think there's a lot of exciting things going on across state government, a lot of different areas to implement AI and address business challenges. One thing that I've seen be relatively successful across different organizations is chatbots. That can really help an organization with responding to routine inquiries and reallocating their staff to focus more on complex needs. I've seen that in multiple different organizations, and I can see that being a real value to smaller organizations where they have limited staff, and even local governments where the staff isn't increasing, but the communities are growing.
Many agencies are eager to adopt AI, but aren't sure where to begin. What advice would you give agency leaders taking their first steps?
I think a good first step is looking at your organization's business challenges. Really, AI tools should be selected because they are responsive to one of your business challenges. So you start there, then identify your use cases and prioritize them based on feasibility and the ability to be implemented. And then start looking for AI solutions that meet those. Do some testing, come up with some measures, and make sure that the tools that you're going to implement are really responsive to a business need.
Dave, once agencies understand the opportunity, the next question becomes, how do we actually get started? DIR recently launched AI literacy modules to help state employees build foundational AI knowledge. Why was it important to create these resources, and what do you hope participants take away from these?
Well, I mean, knowledge is power in any professional environment, right? You want to go unequipped in that sense. And we were required to create the AI awareness training via statute. It's a good 30 or 40 minutes of baseline AI awareness in the public sector. It talks about being cautious about bias, appropriate use cases in the public sector, being cautious, making sure the data is secure. But at the same time, there's always potential for a deeper dive, not just for the frontline users who might use it every day, but for the decision makers, for them to have a foundational sense of it. Even if they don't use AI, if they're an executive making decisions about their program, they should have a sense of what the tools can do and how they can do it. And so we wanted to expand on that kind of basic AI awareness knowledge with the AI literacy program and just do a deeper dive into those topics. And we have specific modules focused on, again, public sector use cases, how to use it safely, contractual considerations, things like that. And we want those resources to be available to anybody in the state who's either managing an AI project or actually using the tools themselves.
What should agencies consider when identifying opportunities to integrate AI into their day-to-day operation?
I'm going to echo what Meredith said in that you really don't want a business solution looking for a problem to solve, right? You want to identify the problem first and then try to find a solution that helps you attack that problem. And from that point of view, you want to start with the endpoint. You want to start with what you want the outcome to be. Do you want faster service? Do you want better data? Do you want, whatever you want? You want to start with that and then work backwards from the end goal. And to that end, you don't want to look at an existing process and just automate it because that's the way it is. You don't want to ever automate a bad process. And if the process has been around for 10 years or so, it may have kind of gotten a little stale over the years. Other stakeholders come in, they want involvement. You can set all that aside now. Go back to the endpoint, work backwards from the endpoint, and apply the appropriate tools to do so. And to be honest, that's been the approach for IT program implementation for a long time. The tools have changed, but the approach is pretty much the same.
And with new AI capabilities emerging almost daily, how should agencies evaluate whether a tool is a right fit for their mission while ensuring it aligns with responsible AI practices?
Well, once it meets those, business and functional and non-functional requirements that I was talking about earlier, DIR has made available the AI system code of ethics. And like I said, that it just includes common sense best practices for responsible AI use. Human oversight, transparency, validating the data is accurate, that's all important. Which is also why that legislature defined what a heightened scrutiny system would be. If it's a system that could really affect the day-to-day life of a constituent, their health, their employment, their income, or their access to state services. These systems require strict risk assessment and the impact documentation before use. And all that stuff is based on NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and their AI risk management framework. If a state agency was looking to implement an AI program, NIST would be a great place to start. And they can compare that to their existing IT governance processes and implement at the appropriate level those safeguards to make sure that they're adhering to the requirements in the AI ethical use policy associated with transparency and validating the data is accurate and stuff like that.
Before we dive into data and governance, I'd love to hear from everyone. What AI misconception do you find yourself correcting most often?
I love this question. May I? Is that okay? Okay. The biggest misconception that I've seen is that large language models, LLMs, are more than just LLMs. Large language models are an abstraction layer between a person and a system. And you can use natural language to engage with that system through the large language models. What large language models are good at is sounding like a person. And that's what they're designed to do. And because people are good at a lot of stuff, people think that large language models are good at a lot of stuff, but they're not. They're good at sounding like a person. You can't bolt a large language model onto a car and expect that car to drive. You can't bolt a large language model onto a robot and expect that robot to be an android. All it does is sounds like it's good at being a person. If you want it to drive a car, that's a different form of AI. It's not the same as a large language model. So people tend to extend the human abilities because they sound like a human to large language models where they simply don't exist. A large language model is not going to break into a bank and steal your money unless it's programmed to do so. That's a different type of model. But people kind of group it all together. So that's one of the most common misconceptions that I've seen regarding artificial intelligence.
I also love this question. And I don't know that mine is necessarily a misconception, but I think one of the issues that I just see repeatedly is this over-reliance on AI and this trust that the large language models know what they're talking about and are accurate, and that they can be substituted for human judgment, used as a research tool, and they can't. It is one of the ethical principles that we must follow when we're using AI is human oversight, because there is that inability of these large language models to substitute for human judgment. They can't do that. And so I see a lot of over-reliance. I see a lot of people using AI and making statements and judgments and publications based on information that they have generated using an AI tool that's not accurate. And it's so important that that human oversight continues to be involved in the process when we use AI.
I love all of that. I'm going to take it from a little bit of a different perspective. I think a misconception out there for some organizations is thinking that their staff are not already using AI just because they haven't deployed an organization-wide AI tool. Likely situation is staff are already using it. They're exposed to it in their daily lives and their personal business, and people get used to using that. So it's important for organizations to know that, to put AI acceptable use policies in place that explain to staff what they can and can't do, and maybe even to implement some governance tools so that the organization has insight into what people are doing, and maybe they can build their governance around that. So I think it's really important for organizations to be aware of what's happening, to have guardrails in place, and to have insight into what's really happening.
Great answer.
Yeah, and I'm going to piggyback on all of those answers too, because sounding like a person and over-reliance, I see and hear that almost daily. There is an over-reliance on AI. I think it's everywhere. AI inside. I think even my toaster has AI on it now. But AI doesn't replace data management fundamentals. It just doesn't. It might look and sound like it is in a very convincing way, but you really do have to make sure those basics are in place for it to be successful. And of course, your AI model itself needs to be tuned well, not just have good data.
Neil, people often hear that AI is only as good as the data behind it. What are the biggest data challenges agencies need to solve before scaling AI?
First and foremost, like everybody here said, find your business case first and real reason for doing it, but also make sure that the data behind that use case is actually fit for purpose. And it doesn't need to be super accurate. I mean, if you're only needing the year out of a particular data field and you don't need the day and month, then that doesn't need to be 100% accurate, but make sure it's fit for the purpose that you need it for. But also along the same lines, don't try to boil the ocean. Find that use case, work that through, do the next one. So many people are tempted to build data dictionaries and things, and those are important, but make sure you focus on these fundamental things first and get some business value going, and I think the rest will follow. And also, to that point, clarifying ownership of the data too is going to save a lot of arguments and discussion later. Make sure you know who's stewarding that data and you understand their role in that, and IT and security and privacy and all of that and how it works together, and get yourself a nice little ratio chart going for when the day comes that you need to talk about the outcomes and who's responsible for the awesomeness that it's now creating. It really is a team sport.
How do data management and AI governance complement one another? And why is that relationship so important?
Well, data management does help ensure that AI use case data is fit for purpose. But of course, AI can also help identify data that needs fixing through the good old-fashioned ways. AI also has obviously governance that guides responsible usage, but the symbiotic relationship between those two disciplines is really going to help build ongoing trust and accountability across the state as it scales from this foundation to this execution phase that we're about to enter.
What role do data management officers and strong data management programs play in preparing agencies for responsible AI adoption?
Data management officers are key, the focal point for the data program for those agencies. So really they are responsible for helping establish the clear lines of ownership for strengthening that quality and that governance around that data. And of course, then leading the agency's data readiness in that. We also have the data maturity assessments that agencies complete, which is a great tool for them to help point out some of these areas to focus on, and that can help then inform your AI and IT and other roadmaps.
Jennie, even with strong data and technology, trust is essential. As agencies adopt AI, what privacy and ethical considerations should they be thinking about from the very beginning?
It's a great question, Tessa. So last session, the legislature passed Senate Bill 1964, and in that law, it directed DIR to establish an AI code of ethics for state and local governments in the state. And it identified a number of ethical principles that the legislature felt were important for all of us as state agencies and local governments to consider as we adopt AI. The first identified principle was human oversight. So recognizing that it is so important that when we're using AI, we continue to have that human in the loop, a process to review those outputs, ensure that not only they're accurate, but that they're also fair, that they are representative of the groups and the data that we want them to be. So human oversight, certainly a prime ethical principle. The other principles that were identified were fairness and redress. So the ability to, review AI, particularly if they're making consequential decisions. If an AI tool is being used to make consequential decisions, we want to be able to review that and have an opportunity for any constituents that are impacted by that AI to seek redress if the decision is unfair or if it's discriminatory, things like that. Accuracy is also an ethical principle that was key in that legislation, making sure that we have that human in the loop to review outputs for accuracy. Transparency, making sure that constituents know when they are interacting with AI and that they know when decisions about their rights or their benefits are being made with the help of AI. And then, of course, data privacy and security. I wear multiple hats at DIR, but privacy is certainly something that I focus on a lot, and making sure that when we are using AI, we are very careful with any personal information and that we are not putting personal information, particularly sensitive personal information, into AI tools, particularly if they are being used outside of our secure environment. There may be instances where you use PII in an AI tool, and that's safe and responsible, but we need to make sure we go through all of the traps before we decide to do that, and make sure that that tool is using that safely, is not sharing that data, is keeping it within our environment. So those are some of the principles. There are more. DIR did establish an AI code of ethics that is now published in Title I, Chapter 219 of the Texas Administrative Code. So you can go read that and learn all about the ethical principles that governments, local governments, and state agencies need to consider when they are adopting AI.
Public trust is essential for successful AI adoption. How can agencies ensure transparency, accountability, and appropriate human oversight when using AI to support government services?
That's a great question, Tessa. So again, both of the bills that were passed last session relating to AI, HB 149, which was the private sector AI law, and Senate Bill 1964, which was the public sector AI law, they both have provisions relating to transparency, making sure that when AI is being used, our constituents know that, particularly if they are interacting with an AI tool, that transparency is key. So, if you are using an AI tool to interact with the public, whether it's a chatbot, or some other tool, at the beginning of that conversation, the constituent needs to be made aware. This is an AI tool. You're interacting with AI. This is not a person talking to you, even though it might sound like a person and it sounds very well spoken, but you need to know that that is an AI tool being used. You make sure that that transparency is there. And then also, if you are using AI to make decisions about individuals, it's so important that that transparency is there, that the public knows what you're using AI for. And there is in Senate Bill 1964 a requirement that agencies use a standardized notice to provide information about AI tools that interact with the public or are being used to make or help make consequential decisions about constituents. You can find that notice on the DIR website, and that's a way to promote transparency among your agency and make sure that you are providing information to the public about the AI tools that you are using. And you asked also about human oversight, and I think it's so important that when agencies adopt AI, particularly given those higher risk AI tools, that they establish from the very beginning a process to have that human oversight, regular review of the outputs so that we understand what the tool is doing and where it might be making mistakes and how we can correct that.
What are some of the most common privacy or legal risks agencies may overlook when evaluating or implementing AI tools?
It really is important when you are looking at an AI tool to understand how that tool uses the data that you put into it. And particularly if there is any possibility that you're going to put personal information, sensitive personal information in that tool. It is imperative that you, before you make a decision to procure and implement that tool, that you understand what the tool is going to do with the data, who it's going to be shared with, whether it's going to be used to train the model, and whether there is any possibility that that data that you might put into that tool is going to leave your secure environment. You really can't make responsible decisions about AI until those questions are answered. So thinking about, how the tool uses the data is absolutely imperative in terms of risk mitigation. Another legal risk that I think about in terms of these AI tools outside of privacy is the record retention and how long some of these tools will maintain prompts if you and your agency don't establish a retention schedule otherwise. A lot of these tools will retain information indefinitely, and that creates enormous storage costs potentially, and also creates a record that you may not want to have. So it really is important when you're implementing these tools to think about how long you as an agency or a governmental entity need to have those inputs and outputs retained, and then to set a retention schedule that disposes of those once they are no longer administratively valuable.
Meredith, I'd like to come back to you. AI technology is evolving rapidly. How does DIR balance encouraging innovation while ensuring agencies implement AI responsibly?
I think balancing innovation with responsible use is something that DIR does across the board, not just with AI. DIR regularly collaborates with state and local governments and vendors to explore innovative solutions through workshops, pilots, and other avenues. This helps ensure transparency and alignment with regulations while exploring new technologies. The goal really is to drive innovation that supports public trust, but also aligns with responsible principles.
So looking ahead, I'd like to hear everyone's perspective on these next couple questions. What do you think defines successful AI adoption in Texas? Dave, let's start with you.
Sure. If you can automate what can be automated and have specialized human beings do specialized human being work, then that's a success. Like I said earlier, the approach really hasn't changed. The tools have changed, but the goals are the same. It was the same goals in the first and second industrial revolution. It was the same goal in the first digital revolution, and it's the same goals now in the digital revolution that we're living through. If you can do more with less, if you can create efficiencies, if you can deliver faster, better, cheaper services, then that's a success, as long as you maintain fewer mistakes and have kind of more power to the user. That to me is success in any programmatic implementation, regardless of the area.
Jennie?
Yeah. Recognize I'm coming at this from a legal and privacy perspective. So my sort of definition of successful AI adoption is, certainly colored by clear governance and risk management and recognize an efficient governance and risk management. So we're not spending all of our time thinking about risk management, and we are able to innovate and to implement these tools that really can create efficiencies for us, but to do it in a responsible way. So I really think establishing some clear governance practices that you follow each time you implement an AI tool can really make for successful, more rapid adoption of AI. And then along those same lines, being able to continuously evaluate not just the model that you're using and the tool, but the outputs of that tool so that you can ensure that not only it works when you implement it, but that it continues to be successful and a good return on your investment down the line as you continue to use that tool.
I agree with Jennie. I think responsible adoption, ensuring that you're incorporating processes for the code of ethics items like human oversight, accuracy, transparency, and the other principles are really important. I think another important thing is measuring outcomes, making sure that the tool that you've implemented is delivering the value that you're looking for. And a third thing, I think, is reviewing feedback from both internal and external stakeholders. It's important to know if there's value and if the constituents are feeling the value from a customer service perspective.
Yeah, completely agree, especially in the outcomes piece. Stole my answer. But yeah, inputs, outputs, efficiencies are all very important, but outcomes are elusive and hard to measure and hard to track. But that's where a lot of the real gold is. Building trust too through that governance, and then having the proven solutions that end up at different agencies, being able to scale those and roll those out across the state too, so everybody can benefit from that investment in time and money.
If you could accelerate one aspect of AI adoption across Texas government over the next year, what would it be?
I think really moving those pilot programs and business cases into production and then being able to scale those across the state to other agencies that can benefit from that would be amazing. Reusing and expanding that proven technology, but also measuring those mission outcomes. Again, not just the efficiencies. I think that's where a lot of good is to be had.
I agree with that. I think something else that can really help an organization accelerate AI adoption is developing an AI vision and a roadmap. We've talked about identifying business challenges, prioritizing use cases, but after that, building a roadmap to add some timelines to these things, to have short wins as well as longer term initiatives really helps with the acceleration component. And it also helps with change management so that staff know where things are headed, what they can expect, and can be a support throughout those processes. So I really think these are things that help accelerate AI adoption.
I've heard from a number of agencies that are in the process of adopting AI or kind of starting their AI journey that a lot of times the delay focuses on risk mitigation and hand-wringing, which is valid, and we're all doing it. But I think my hope is that we can, over the course of the next year or two, really establish some set risk management practices and processes so that is not the delay, so that we have a process in place and we are evaluating the risk and making a decision and then moving forward instead of having to spend a lot of time worrying about whether this is a risk that we should take on as a governmental entity. So, I think that will occur once there are definitive processes in place within an agency. And so I certainly encourage that to, have that process, that risk assessment, and, go forward.
Yeah, totally agree, Jennie. I mean, you got to somehow, at some point, take that first bite out of the elephant, right? Once you get the governance in place, once you get the training in place, once your data is ready, just do the pilot. Once you do a pilot, then all of a sudden you realize that the project manager and the analyst and the business owner is a little community of practice. They have some experience with AI, and you can expand that pilot to a next phase, bring in more people, and then it starts to accelerate. But I've seen the same thing. At some point, you've got to say, look, we've got the risk mitigation measures in place, we got good advice from DIR, and are ready to go for it. So that's what I'd like to see accelerating, is just taking that first step.